What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Inkcast. My name is Brad, otherwise known as Bradsford, and we're doing a meta pick'em this week to actually look ahead at DLC Chicago to see what the top decks are going to be for you guys playing and for you guys watching and prepping for the next one. All right, guys. So as you can see in front of us, we have our tier list maker from S all the way down to D tier. I'm joined by Default Dan and Prashant. Say hello, my friends.
What's up? What's up?
Yeah, morning or
Are you guys
afternoon, whatever
excited
time you're watching it.
for? You guys excited for DLC Chicago?
I am. I wish I was going. Wish I was playing, but the wife ain't gonna okay the travel and all of that unless I 100% could say I was gonna win one of those $250,000 Mickeys.
Yeah,
That
interesting.
much now?
Yeah, well, there's one listed pristine 10 for 250,000. I don't think it's sold yet, but that's what it's listed for.
Well, as you can see on the list in front of us, we do have a few of them already in a little bit of a spot on D tier. Just want to get those out of the way. These are simply non-established color pairings, ones that have had fringe, playability throughout all the metas, but as it currently stands, don't really have an established archetype to really say you need to look out for this.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're not going to see any of these colors in DLC Chicago if you're so going? Of course not. You might very well see some brews or whatever. We might be shocked again, just like with DLC Atlanta, where a seemingly homebrew is what takes down the entire thing. But as far as established meta calls, these color pairings are certainly not that.
Yeah, at least at the moment, like you mentioned, there's definitely some cool synergies with all these different color pairs, but nobody's really shown in a deck to do very well yet. But I am excited because I think there's a lot of these pro grinders out there that they're holding their decks a little closer to their chest than they did for Atlanta. Now that
Yeah.
they see what's up for grabs when it comes to some of these cards.
I guess one thing I want to ask both of you before we get through the rest of the color pairings, out of the four pairings we see in D tier,
Hmm.
which one do you think has the most or best likelihood of surprising people?
So I've been looking at lemon lime a little bit.
Mhm.
Just with like I don't know, like of course you had like the Diablo, Ursula, like
Mhm.
types of combos and all
Your
that.
good green stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like good green stuff, and then like I've seen like I guess the what is it? What is the card called? Is it the Kita kinda?
Kita.
Kita.
Kita. That one
From
looked pretty interesting in the like lemon lime.
Mhm.
The guy, it's something I don't play because I'm not that good at it. I've just been playing Ruby Sapphire, but I've seen it like bubbled up on the YouTubes.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see if anyone will actually bring that to Chicago or if it's going to be more of the same, just more evolved of what we've seen in Atlanta and so far in the meta.
Yeah, that's actually the color combo I was looking at too, because you can either go I don't want to say the old school because it wasn't that long ago, but the whole Pride Lens combo, because you do have a Flynn being a prince that is
Mhm.
one drop. And that combo, like if they can't stop it, you literally win on turn 4 or 5. It's very easy to disrupt, but that's one of the things with Pride Lands, Simba, and then you going off with Stitch Rockstar, pretty much drawing your whole deck. The other side of that is kind of what Prashant was saying. I mean, you can still have the whole Bucky discard package, and then rather than doing steel with a lot of your you shifting, you can throw in some morphs, and then you have a handful of Floodborn shifts when it comes to like Queen, right? We've already seen that the Queen is really
Yep.
good in Steel Song, so bringing that in. Flynn has a Floodborn shift that you can do as well. So just playing the 2-drop Flynn for value and then shifting later into the evasive one. I think if we're talking homebrews and that person that's just been keeping something close to their chest, I think that would be the surprise for me out of this list. But I think Brad, you have a different color combo you've been messing around with that you're finding fun. I don't know if you think it's competitive, but
Oh, you're talking about Blurple? Oh,
yeah.
absolutely not. Yeah, the Blurple is not on my radar. I would not bring that genuinely to DLC Chicago. I was saying that well, two things. A, don't bring Blurple. Blurple's a lot of fun. I think Isabella and Bruno are both really cool cards from set 4 that definitely have legs. I think you're actually going to see copies of both of those represented in Chicago in general, but maybe not in a deck together. But when it comes to Lemon Lime, I do think there's something with the record player muses type of
Hmm.
tempo-y list we saw mess around with a couple weeks ago when the set first kind of came out on Pixelboard. So that's the one I was thinking of to watch out for.
Yeah.
But the one that I think is the one that's most likely to shock people and kind of come out of this as a just a sleeper pick is actually Amber Sapphire, because I really think you could get a hero list going with some songs. Or a
Hmm.
lot of the princesses are like the singers, like Ariel, Cinderella. They're all heroes as well. You have the new Anna, both as the 2-drop, the 1/4 that cares about having another hero taps for 2, as well as the 4-drop that when she goes ahead and quests, she gives all your other heroes an additional lore to quest for that turn.
Hmm.
Um, and then a lot of the bodyguards are also heroes as well. So I really think there's something there. That one's a tougher nut to crack, in my opinion, but that would be my pick as just like, wow, this deck has a
Yeah.
very fast, aggressive start while also having some good bodyguards to help stabilize and protect it from a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and maybe not really care about what the green deck's really doing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that, there's a lot of great cards in there as well as fast cards. So like you mentioned, using those heroes with Ana being a quick drop that's going to be tapping for 2, and a lot of great, pieces there. But kind of going from D, I just want to go ahead and jump into S real quick, and then we'll work our way down rather
Yeah.
than just going up, because it's pretty obvious what we're going to have up in the S. It is essentially the 2 decks that have been dominating the format right now, right? It's the Bucky, Emerald-Steel list and the Sisu blue-red ice block combo. And essentially, if you look at each weekend, one of these decks wins it, and but both of them are always in the top 4. But I'm curious from you guys, like Rashawn, you mentioned a second ago, like blue-red's your color of choice. But out of these 2, do you guys think that this is going to be the winner for the weekend, one of these? And if so, which one do you think's taken down this weekend? So I'll start with you, Prashant, just because I know your pick, I know where you are, but see what you got.
Yeah, with Ruby Sapphire, like if you get the right card draws, like you could really get the board under control. Especially like taking out smaller things with the smaller Sisu, and then building up into like the bigger Sisu and be prepared, just using like one jump ahead and like just getting more ink than the opponent is. And then even like Brawl is a pretty decent card too. To take cards out, Ice Block, like mentioned before, that's like the MVP by taking things down even quicker. And then even the late game too, because you're just building up for that. Be prepared. You're playing the Madame, just throwing things off the board as soon as they play them. And then with like Lucky Dime has been pretty clutch too for me end game as well. And then Ariel, I put Ariel in my decks.
Hmm.
I think that's a surprise card or a pretty
Yeah.
decent card that I've came about in this new set that I think is pretty good. Bell, if you are deep in the pockets, you can always put in Bell. I think Bell is a good card as well. But if you're going on the budget, I think Ariel fits in just fine.
Yeah. How about you, Brad? You on the blue-red train as well, or do you think green steel is going to be taking it down?
Now, is this a would you rather situation? Win between the 2, or is it asking me what I think is going to win overall?
No, just between these 2.
Okay.
Because I think we all have our opinions of what may sneak into the top that everybody isn't expecting. But out of these 2 that we know will be everywhere.
So I think out of these 2, I think the green steel is going to be more abundant. So statistically, it's going to be more likely to win over, Ruby Sapphire. I will say though, I think neither one of these are going to win Chicago. I think we're going to get something that people are underprepared for. And that's probably going to just be that, like, 3 or 4 copies that sneak into top 64 of like a deck, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, no one cares about Mufasa or whatever, and then that just randomly wins. Like, I really think that that's a sleeper deck. But yeah, between these 2, I think it's good, the green one. It's just super consistent. It has a lot of answers to stuff. Bucky is a scary card to get going.
Mhm.
Whenever you see people talking about running the Trident card, the one drop uninkable that like your opponent chooses something to deal damage to,
Yeah.
um, as like a potential way to deal with Bucky, and that card is atrocious, by the
Yeah.
way. Then that kind of speaks volumes to people's opinions of the deck.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I like both decks. I want to at least shout out for Prashan. I do like the Aerial in the list a lot, and I know Prashan, you mentioned getting to be prepared and stuff like that for that list.
Mhm.
I've seen so many. What's really scary about the Ruby list, in my opinion, is like the fact that I've seen a lot of lists running like all the way down to one copy of Be
Mhm.
Prepared, and just saying, yeah, Medusa and Tremaine, they're gonna get me there in the late game, or the Maleficent Dragon. Like they've kind of evolved to this like spot removal type of thing, where it feels a bit more mid-rangey than just all in control. And then you
Mhm.
only have like a single copy of Be Prepared because you're like, if I need it, I need it. But for the most
Yeah.
part, I can keep up and put bodies on the board. So I both of them are scary.
Yeah, and I've seen that too with Flynn becoming more of a mainstay in these decks when people were trying to fight the mirror. So they're less inclined to be prepared in a lot of matchups. Again, it does come down to who you're facing and what they have on the board, if you're going to use that or not. But I think that is, to your point, become like the scary part because they could just sisu you. Like it's
Yeah.
depending on like what's on the board, because a lot of the aggro decks have kind of stepped back uh, in the current format, so where wiping a board just doesn't as needed. They have one or two characters down rather than what it used to be, and then they have Maui or whatever kind of coming down. But it's definitely one or two of still in the deck, especially against the Bucky decks. And I'm going to throw a little wrench in here because I do think, personally, I think that the Emerald-Steel deck is better if you get your draws. And again, that's true for any deck out there. If you don't get your draws, you're just not going to win. But I do think if you can get the whole like turn 2 Bucky, turn 3 Diablo, or turn 3 Prince John, whatever it is, and like you're just like going off, it's unstoppable. But the wrench I'm gonna throw in here is I also think there's gonna be a sleeper green steel deck. I would not put it in S tier. I'd probably put it in B tier. But I think we're gonna be seeing the mill decks come back. So if you guys don't remember, in like set 2, Green Steel had a mill deck where you were playing A Whole New World multiple times, and you were bringing it back with the green Tremaine, I
Tremaine,
believe.
the 6 drop. Yeah,
Yeah,
she's uninkable.
and there's a spell that you can cast that you can sing, that you can pull a action back into your hand from your discard. And I think somebody is going to go crazy with that deck, and nobody's prepared for it, because again, this is one of those cards where like not running Chernobog, there's really no way of, or I guess brooms, if you got your broom package going properly, I don't think you can beat it if you're not prepared for it. And it can beat you on like turn 6 or 7 if you're not paying attention. So I don't know. I would not classify it as a S tier whatsoever, but it wouldn't shock me if somebody's on that deck and then makes top 64, makes second day, potentially even getting higher than that, if they know the deck well enough. Because I played it for fun in set 2, and it was a whole lot of fun. And then all the aggro decks came out, and it really wasn't feasible with the aggro decks. But the aggro decks have disappeared right now. So like,
Yeah.
that's one of my sleepers. And I wanted to call it out because that color's already up here. We don't have another green steel to call out and put somewhere else. But that's what I
Right.
got.
Yeah, I guess we also should quickly preface yes, all these colors have potential other decks like the ones you named. Like
Mhm.
even with the Emerald Steel, there are bigger versions that cut kind of like a little bit of your early game and kind of focus on no
Mhm.
bad top decks for the most part. Go a
Yeah.
little bit bigger, taller, more mid rangey. But when we speak about each color, we're speaking about the number one defining archetype of that pairing. If you're playing something different or a little bit something a little off meta a little bit with these color pairings, keep in mind, if we mention them, we do. If we don't, we don't. We're sorry. But yeah, we're trying to keep it as these are the ones that your grinders are playing the most of.
Yeah.
So I know like the Emerald Steel deck is pretty expensive when it
Yeah.
comes to
It's like $800.
yeah. So like I know, Dan, when you went to Atlanta, was there a bunch of gamers or just like regular like folks that just love the game
So
playing?
so it was mixed for day one. If you looked at like the full day one of who's there, what's going on, a lot of new players, a lot of people that just like Disney, they picked up the game, maybe they played Pixelborn some. So you had, 200, $300 decks out there. But when we do look at something like an $800 deck, those are going to be your grinders. And if you look at the top 64 cut, I would say at least 70% of those top 64 cut were gamers. And when you got into like the top 32, the top 16, you definitely had all the grinders, especially top 8. I think if you look at top 8, every one of them are like tournament pros at some level. So I would expect, to your point, the average person may not have, Emerald Steel completely made, or even Ruby Sapphire completely made. But I would definitely say anybody who's going there to grind is definitely going to have those decks. And with it being Chicago, I think Atlanta also had the unfortunate issue with first come first serve. And I think with Chicago, I think it was a lot less of that. So you're getting the more, like, the further we get into these DLCs, the more grinders you're going to get that are really trying to get those expensive cards. Because if you want a Mickey and you're selling your Mickey, it means you also think you're probably going to win another Mickey at some point. That's just my opinion. Because that card is going to be a valuable card. And if you're already dumping it, you have expectations for that not to be your only one.
Yeah.
Right. So going into, do we want to go to A now and we'll just work our way down?
We could also just pick out from what's in the bottom. I just go in order that way. Start with LA.
Yeah.
So we got the Lakers combination of purple Amethyst-Amber. I'm thinking C.
All right.
They can see it's like just like your aggressive, like you have your bounce package stuff like that. So there's two things. So we'll basically call this one the Atlanta deck, right? Because that's like the biggest representation of this color pairing.
Yeah.
There were before the aggressive kinds that like did like the Lilo early game stuff like that. With your even like your one drop Maleficent stuff that really is almost non-existent. So this is just the Atlanta Perdita, what's her name, fairy godmother, Cinderella, that kind of thing. I think it didn't really gain anything from the new set, so it's kind of a flash in a pan kind of a situation, in my opinion. I don't expect too much from this list. I actually almost don't expect there to be more than maybe 5 total of these decks.
I would agree with that. I think that this is a deck that we could see some non-grinders picking up because they were like, hey, it won Atlanta, let me bring it here. But like, remember, Atlanta was no set 4. Right. And definitely to your point, it didn't really gain anything from set 4. I think even in interviews with Josh, who won, like he even said, like this deck is not a set 4 deck. It's not going to be good there. But it was a good call for Atlanta because when you're playing those homebrews, nobody knows what you're doing. They don't really know what's in your deck, especially for a day 1 situation. They can't predict what your next play is. Whereas your green steel, your ruby amethyst, they know probably 90 to 95% of your list, and they know what you're playing next based on your plays. Right. Yeah, I would agree there. So Prashant, what color you want to grab next? What color pair, and where do you think it is?
Ooh. I think let's go amethyst ruby.
All right. Where are you putting it? You putting it up in A?
I think it's A tier.
All right.
So like, we're going off the new one, right? The one that has like all the bounce stuff and like the red
so
Flynn.
bounce like Flynn Rider. Like I think the stock on that card has gone up pretty high, especially since you can gain that lore like pretty early. And then you have the goats and the bounce package, which I think is pretty cool too, towards the end game. So yeah, and then you can also use Be Prepared, Brawl, like all that stuff just to get rid of their stuff, and then you're just bouncing back and forth. So yeah.
I also think this is a really good pick against these S tier decks. The Flynn, I think in particular, if you're matched up against either Emerald-Steel or Ruby Sapphire, in my opinion, you're mulliganing pretty aggressively to your Flynn because two things are going to happen. Either going against Emerald-Steel, in which the highest power they can really put out by turn 3 is 3 power. which your turn 3 is typically Sisu, and she's gonna be 5 or 6 power. Um, because a lot of their stuff is either Beast, Robin Hood at the top end, or it's just your Prince Johns, your Buckies, whatever. They're
Mhm.
all at 1 power, right? So Flynn can easily steal some turns of lore with that, as well as against control. They're playing pretty much no creatures for the first 4 turns, and when they do play a
Mhm.
creature, it's Hiram, who's a 1 power.
Mhm.
So, and or if they're playing the small Sisu to snipe something, that's also a 1 power. So, a lot of their stuff is pretty low in threat level, and Flynn can easily steal, 6, 9, maybe even 12 lore. Like it's a must brawl target, which you're happy with because then you can start establishing your other threats. So
No, I agree, and I think this is we saw this deck at second place a couple weekends ago at a big tournament, and I agree with you. I think it's still that third deck when we think of rock paper scissors type style
mhm.
of decks, and this is kind of what's going to bring the balance there. And so I'm going to jump into my other A pick is going to be Steel Song. So again,
Yeah.
I don't think Steel Song is better than the top two S decks, but Steel Song is just solid. It's always been solid, probably always will be solid. Having Cinderella on one to be able to sing one of your kill spells, so they get their Flynn out and you just smash, you not smash it, but you just blow it away with um was it the fires or something like that.
Yeah.
You've got so many great cards going through there. You get access to grab your swords, right? And so again, a card that's kind of disappeared from the format for a little while, but with Bucky and John and all them having ward and not being able to touch them, like grab your swords on turn 3 off of your shift, or even turn 2 off of your queen shift. I think that's too early to play it, but let's just say you could if they did some crazy,
Mhm.
you know, uh, Bucky into Diablo shift or something on there too. Like there's a lot of playability in that deck still. I don't think it's S tier like it was back in set one when it was always competing with Ruby Amethyst, but I still think it's still in that same spot with Ruby Amethyst. It's right there in the A tier. It has all
Yeah.
the answers it needs. It's just going to come down to your draws.
Well, it's another deck that, like, again, didn't really kind of similar to that Perdita list
Hmm.
that we have all that on C tier. It's
Yeah,
another deck that really didn't gain anything in
right.
this set. However, its power level was already so high that I think it's one of those decks. Well, actually, I probably think the only deck in this entire list that could afford to not gain anything,
Yeah.
because the stuff that you're going to tech in, like multiple copies of Grab Your Swords or even Big Tink, are ones that already existed to
Hmm.
be able to combat what you have going on at the Emerald matchup, and already feels pretty decent against control just because you could wheel a whole new world
Yeah.
pretty early. Against control, yes, you give them 7 cards, but I've been on that matchup before as a control player, and you're
Yeah.
like, wow, you just got rid of 2 Medusas and a Be Prepared out of my hand, and I just drew
Yeah. Yeah.
4 ice blocks. Like stuff like that happens. Um,
Well,
but
especially
I will. The last thing is probably the most skill dependent deck I think in
yeah.
this list, where your pilot ability is what
Is this
matters
the
the
deck
most.
with Smee and Rapunzel?
It can. So some can run the Smee Rapunzel card draw. Like that's the beauty of this color is there's a lot of slight variations you can put in there. But to your point, Brad, with the early wheel, like they mulliganed to keep their hand. So what they have in their hand is what they want in their hand. And if you're
Right.
turn twoing a wheel off of a queen shift, you literally just set them back on the cards that they really wanted. And you may
Mhm.
wheel them into on turn 2 like, hey, you can have all those Medusas and whatever, but now you have a bunch of uninkables in your hand and you're not getting to 6. So a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
lot of
one of
play
those things
patterns.
when it comes to a pilot. Like if I'm going against you, Britt, and I'm on this Amber Steel deck, and you're on control, and I see you say I'm gonna just put 1 back. I'm like, oh, you really like your hand, I guess.
Yep.
Would be a shame
Yeah.
if I wield it. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a cool deck.
Yeah. So so kind of moving from there, Brad, like we've got a couple more colors left. What do you got? A, B, C? What do you think of these other ones?
Let's take this Rakdos cover pair, Ruby and Steel. Let's put it in C tier. I I'm only putting in C tier because there is a halfway sort of vaguely established archetype of pirates or just like locations matters lists.
Yep.
I do think this is a pretty poor deck. I actually think if there's anything that's going to come out of this color pairing, it's more likely to be some form of a homebrew
Hmm.
that someone hasn't really established yet. I actually really like Flynn in this color pairing because you have access to I forgot his name, but it's a 3 cost that enters exerted and only untaps when you banish something in a challenge or challenge something in
Yeah.
general. It's a 6/6. So being able to run the Sisu cares about your hand size on 3, or as well as that card to really
Hmm.
help Flynn get aggressive, and then maybe do like a rush style type of list. Maybe there's a couple of sheer cons in there just to have a little bit of that flexibility. I don't really know how that list would look, but that one feels like the most likely to do something. But the
Yeah.
reason that list would be in C tier is because sometimes you don't have stuff to attack.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
eh.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those that could be a sleeper, just because also kind of going back to what we said earlier, not knowing what they have in their deck. I know when we were doing the store
Right.
championships, there was a guy who made top 4 with just this random location deck, and it was because nobody knew what to watch out for. And then all of a sudden, John Silver came down. And you're like, well, can't do anything against that card because he has resist 5 because he has 5 locations, and he's just gaining all this lore out of nowhere. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right, Prashant, what you got next color pair, and where does it go?
I think I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go purple green,
All right, where are
and
you putting it?
I think I don't know. I'm either thinking A or B.
Hmm.
I'm gonna say B.
All
Yeah,
right, let's go B.
yeah. I would as well. So what are you thinking there with that color pairing?
So more bounce, of
Mm.
course, and then you're running like the Diablo package as well. Um,
Yeah.
and you're running what, like friends on the other side.
Hmm.
That way you're drawing what you need as well. Like that's pretty much it. Like you're just
Yeah.
bouncing and going.
Yeah, I think this is kind of that tempo style of
Mhm.
Bucky. You don't have to use Bucky, but you could still use the Bucky Diablo. Maybe it's just Diablos which are leveraging with like Ursula. So being able
Yep.
to sing friends twice, draw 4 cards is pretty huge. So I would agree. I think it's probably B. I don't think it's good enough for A yet. There's definitely people out there that will say this is, the quote unquote best deck, but when I've played it, I feel like the interaction hasn't felt great. So if they have a bunch going on, you're kind of racing, and I don't feel like it's the best race deck.
Yeah,
out
I think
there.
I feel sometimes my bouncing is awkward, or I bounce the wrong thing at the wrong time, or
Mhm.
I'm playing the wrong thing at the wrong time as well. So that's my only problem with it. Like I feel like the S tier decks, you could just put it on like autopilot, and even if you like make a mistake or two, you're still fine.
Yeah. What do you think, Brad? B, where it belongs, and I think it's so.
Yeah. So my hot take is I would actually personally put it in C. I think it's kind of meh. I think the only reason you could even argue it for B right now is because it has just really strong cards in a vacuum in your
Yeah.
green stuff and then your bounce package. But I think where it currently stands against everything else is just falling behind. Again, it's another deck like Amethyst-Steel that just didn't get anything in this
Yeah.
set to really help it kind of take that next step. Uh, and because like again, it got Diablo right, but
Mhm.
Diablo fits better in the steel version of the list
Yeah.
than this version. I guess you could run if you wanted to the 1-drop Diablo in purple,
Mhm.
because you can the one that says when you play Maleficent, you get to look at the top card.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you could do that one instead of the green one, which I think is worse, where you take a look at their hand.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's up to you. I think it's still there's power to it, but lack of interaction is where this one kind of fails me.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead. I know I've been picking a lot of the A ones, but I'm gonna go with blue steel, and I'm gonna put up an A. I think if you look at what are kind of the top 3 decks that have a chance against the S decks, I think this is probably the one that may stand some of the best chance, only because you're getting your ramp, you're getting your late game with your beast, your tinks, your cards that can tap for a lot, that can give you value. It has grab your swords to take care of, the Buckies and stuff that are running around with Diablo, and because of the ramp, you can get it out maybe turn 3. You've got your item draw package that Red Blue's using. Like it has the answers kind of from both of the S tier decks to handle both of them. Do I think it's better than those? I don't. I think it's like it wants to be Red Blue, but it doesn't have the powerful removal that Red has. It has the subpar removal that Steel has. And does it, want to be able to interact with your opponent and stuff? It can't, like the Emerald Steel with all the discard and stuff. But when you get that going with like, hey, I've taken care of the board with my grab your swords, and now I've thrown down Tamatoa, Bell, Ariel, any of these cards, especially with Ariel being, I think, a solid pick for this deck. Not that she's not a great pick for Red Blue. I think she's really solid here because of your Fortisphere and your Popsicle. Like you literally have 2 Popsicles now, so 8 cards. And now Ariel can tap for a whole lot of lore. I think this is one of those that could be a sleeper, could take down the whole tournament, could show up in top 4. But like I said, I don't think it's S tier, but I think it's one of those good decks to combat the S tier decks.
Yeah, it's I would argue it's at times feels more like the control deck of the meta than the Sapphire Ruby one does. Again, because of the Sapphire Ruby one having access to a lot more of like mid-range cards to me, like Brawl is spot removal, Small Sisu is spot removal, Ice Block comboing with other stuff like Big Sisu, Medusa, Tremaine. It's doing a lot of like 1-for-1 trading, which feels way more mid-rangey to me. Where the Sapphire version of it, or sorry, the Sapphire Steel version of it, focus a bit more on just card draw, playing some spot removal with your like your steel stuff, but really leaning on grab your swords as like a way to kind of reset and then establish your own stuff. That feels way more controlling to me. I like the deck a lot. I would maybe even bring this if I was to play, because I think you have no bad matchup, just you have no like amazing I have a free buy matchup.
Yeah, kind of that 50-50 deck on every
Right.
match, which isn't terrible when you're doing this 2-game format on day 1 as well.
Hate that format.
I think we all do. All right, so Brad, we've got 3 left. He's looking a little sad. See, what are you thinking here?
Do I go with the one that I think is the easiest B tier, or do I go with the one that is the spicy B tier? I think really looking at the 3 left, I think there's 1 B tier, 2 C tiers, in my opinion. So I'm gonna take Amethyst-Steel.
All right.
Put it at the top of C tier.
All right.
I could see a way you could argue it's B tier if and I don't I know a lot of people look at this and be like, okay, Jafar, but I actually think the deck that would be more likely to take out of these colors is actually Brooms, because all it takes is that one location where it just gives everyone an additional lore, and you just kind of dump your hand of all the Brooms essentially, and then win out of nowhere with that. It's more of like a combo-y deck, it feels like. That's what I actually feel is the better of for that pairing. And let's keep in mind, there's also your old deck from last set, Brit, where you had like the more like aggressive, almost a little bit mid-rangey version of the color pairing with your bounce stuff, your Smees, your Captain Hooks. So I think there's an actual fairly even split of what these 3 decks could be for this pairing, but they're all C tier.
Yeah.
So, but hey, it's a cool pairing. I like it a lot. I almost want to put it in B tier because I think it could shock people, but we're not quite established enough yet for me to confidently do that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's like C+, B-. It's right in there to where, like, if I know with you mentioned the deck I was using just the aggro little. So your biggest card is Robin Hood. Most of your stuff is like a 3-drop. So when it comes to like the Bucky matchups, it doesn't feel terrible because you can usually get a lot of stuff out quickly. as long as they don't get the Ursula and like start double singing all their kill spells. But yeah, I would agree with you. I don't think it's a contender anymore. I think the Jafar wheel, like I actually played against that in Atlanta. It's scary if you're not prepared for it. Like all of a sudden they just like shift the Jafar and sing something and shift the Robin Hood and sing it again. Like, not the same spell, but like shoot a whole new
Yeah.
worlds or something like that, like super quickly. But it is one of those where like that deck can fall apart if you just don't draw your Jafar. So
Agreed.
I would agree with you. I think it's right there in between B and C. If we saw something that was more consistent, then I think it's B. Right now, all the decks and even the Brooms deck feels when it goes off, it goes off. But it just feels like it's missing one thing to be a real contender in a B or an A tier
Oh yeah.
type list. All right, Prashant. So out of the last two, either of these combos stand out to you? Which one
I
do you
guess
think's B? Which one do you think C?
Ruby Amethyst,
All right.
and I think it's a B.
Well, Ruby Amber, but yeah.
Oh, Ruby Amber.
Yeah, you're
Sorry,
good. You're
Ruby
good.
Amber. Sorry, Ruby Amber. I'm new. I
Yeah.
think this one's pretty decent. You have Flynn again. You
Mhm.
have like the damage and the removal from red, and then you have cards like Cinderella, Mufasa.
Yeah.
What else is there? Like Stitch, like those type of cards to play as well.
Mhm.
I think this deck feels okay. It's not as powerful as
Mhm.
the A and S tiers, but I think it could keep up with all the other tiers that are right like at B and below.
Yeah. I would agree here. I think this is the one Brad was also thinking about being the obvious B. This is a
Yeah.
deck that's just been around for a little while. A lot of the Simba or Mufasa style decks where Mufasa's coming down, he taps for 2. You feel bad when you remove him because there's no idea what he's going to hit. There's no real songs. They may have some bare necessities in the deck, but outside of that, it's just straight up creatures. Most of their creatures tap for 2, so even if you remove Mufasa, you're still getting a 2 lore character coming back in his place. It could be a Chernobog, could be a Maleficent Dragon, like all kinds of scary stuff coming out of there. And again, I don't think it's S tier. I don't think it's even A tier. But when this deck runs and you can't answer it, it's hard. It's very hard to beat it if you can't answer it, especially if you don't have Be Prepareds, Grab Your Swords, anything to kind of shut down multiple characters at once. But I would agree. I think it's a B in there, and I think it's always a valid deck to bring. Like I know me and Brad come from Magic. This kind of feels like the Goblins deck to me a little bit, where it's a
Yeah.
fairly cheap deck. Like again, Mufasa fluctuates here and there, but it's just one of those decks where like you gotta know it's going to be around because this is a favorite to a lot of people.
Yeah, I'd actually put it at the top of B. I think it's better than the other one. This is my dark horse to win Chicago. I just think it's one of those things like all it take like out of all these decks here, this one has the potential just to be the most rewarding for when you run hot.
Mm-hmm.
You get those lucky hits off of Mufasa. You get those great, fast, aggressive starts. You got the addition of the new beast to for damage. You got the Mulan package as well, the small Mulan into the big Mulan. You have your obviously Rapunzel's a great source of card draw, but you have the new Madrigal as well. That is just the 3-drop version of Rapunzel to draw a card.
Yeah.
So it's gotten probably the most upgrades
Mm-hmm.
from set 4 on for than any other list or on this tier list, and it's just the one that I think is the most explosive and has the best chance to high roll.
Yeah.
I think the best high roll for this one beats the best high roll for a lot of other decks. And it's just if that person runs hot with their slot machine
Yeah.
essentially, then
Yeah.
that they could easily take down the whole tournament. That's just how these things kind of work.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's what happened in Atlanta with Amber Amethyst. It was that similar. He had Mufasa in there, and it's just like if they get to going and you don't see it coming, or you see it coming too late, it's just hard to deal with. And the last color pairing, I mean, I think this is a C tier, and honestly, I'm gonna put it right below Amethyst-Steel because this is the evasive deck, right? So it's a lot of people don't run it, but in my opinion, when you're looking at this, you're not necessarily looking at Bucky or Diablo or whatever. You're just looking at straight evasives. Every card in here has evasive. You're leveraging Peter Pan to give them like rush or whatever. I can't remember which one it is, but
Those are both in purple though.
oh, they're both in, okay,
right?
never mind. So you're using like
Yeah.
sorry, the other green Peter Pan leader of the Lost Boys, things like that. But
Yeah.
essentially what happens is when this deck comes in there and you're against it, you don't have evasive, so you're not running green steel. You're probably not beating it because you can't kill any of their deck. It's all evasive. You literally have to be prepared, grab your swords. You have to be running one of these top decks to be able to deal with it. And I don't think it's going to take down the tournament. If we're looking at top 64, there may be one, if they're lucky, to get to top 64 for day 2. But I would just say, like, I imagine there's a handful of people running this or running a version of it that'll be at Chicago, but that's why it's down in C tier. I think I would personally rather take Jafar Wheel over this deck, and I still don't even think Jafar Wheel is a good pick, but that's where I see it. I see it kind of there, like it's kind of even between that and like the pirate location deck. It's not going to be great, but it may show up from that one person that just like this is their deck. They love Pongo and Mini.
I also think like the reason this evasive deck has no place at the moment to like really be a player is simply because of the Ruby Sapphire list.
Yeah.
You have most of your evasive stuff. When you give a card evasive, the way you balance it is you give it less strength.
Yeah.
Right. So your mini is a 1. A lot of your evasive like Tinkerbell and stuff like that, that's a 2 power and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you have Small Caesar that snipes it. You have Brawl that snipes all of them pretty much. You have Medusa that snipes all of them. So it's just really bad into that deck.
Yeah.
And if one of the top representative decks in the entire tournament is your worst matchup, probably not a good call to bring it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So,
but it did gain, in all fairness, it did gain small Pegasus and big Pegasus in this set. So it's some upgrades. It's just it doesn't help.
Yeah, that's, and again, it kind of comes down to where they have to have it, right? Like, you know, it's one of those decks, you know, realistically, if we're looking at this list, it's like realistically, if you're looking at the list, right? Like, this is probably better than Steel Song. But anything that's B below, like, or let's say this, if it's B, make sure you know how to play it. Make sure it's a deck you've been playing for a long time. You know every line of it, and you feel confident against any of the SNA decks. Like, oh yeah, I beat Ruby Sapphire all the time with this deck because I know my lines. If you're C or D, don't bring it. Like, unless you just don't have any, like, the money, the time, whatever to figure out. And I know this is coming out Friday before Chicago, but think of this in future DLCs because set 4 it'll be the same meta. Set 4, things like that will still be there. But anything in C and D, if you're just going to have fun, you want to do your 3 rounds to get your Dragon's Fire, bring it, have some fun. But realistically, unless we're all shocked, which we could be, we were at Atlanta, these 8 decks are probably not going to be making top 8. And most likely, you're not going to see many of them making day 2 as well.
So is there anything that could counter hard the S tier decks?
I think the A tiers. I think all the A tiers have game against the S tiers. But again, it's going to come down to the pilot. You have to remember, like, there may be people that threw down the money to make one of the S decks that don't play a lot. They haven't played Pixelborn, ever. They just put the deck together. There's a lot of net deckers out there. And as long as you're a better pilot than them, then you should be able to take them down. Maybe they don't get their draws and things like that. But I would say if you're not playing one of the S tier decks, play one of the A tier decks and just play whichever one you're more comfortable with, the play style, the cards, and how to run it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, once the weekend's over, come next week, we're probably going to be looking at whatever the top list is. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a brainstorming session as a video and some gameplay to try to determine, okay, how do you beat this? Like, if you were trying to just, brew something that's maybe a bit cheaper, even maybe budget, let's see if we can actually do something to beat that can, keep up. But hey, maybe it will be one of those 8 color pairings at the bottom there.
Maybe
Yeah,
so.
and then especially with like what store tournaments coming up soon,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it will
we've
be
got
a good gauge to see what you're comfortable with and what you will see at those tournaments.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at DLC Chicago after this weekend. We're going to be looking at the big 10K that's happening in Atlanta in just a couple weeks as well with these Charlie's Collectibles. And then, of course, like Prashant mentioned, July is going to be coming around and we're going to have the store championships for that Ursula. And so make sure you're staying tuned. You hit the like, the subscribe, leave the comment down below of what deck do you think is going to take down Chicago this weekend? Which pair did we get wrong? We put in the C or the D tier and you're like, no, this is A tier. You tell us why in the comments. But we're going to be covering all of that. And we're going to be doing our predictions for all these big tournaments coming up. Breakdowns, like Brad said, maybe some anti-decks against some of the top decks. So we're excited about all the content coming. Appreciate all you guys, the support you're giving us all here on the channel already. Until next time, guys, y'all take it easy.
All right, see ya.